I'm Michael and welcome to GTK tutorial. Today we are going to move on and we are going to learn some new functions. Until now, as you already know, we learned so many functions and we saw the connection between them and we saw how those signals are handled based on their IDs or data or func or closure and so on. Because we know all those things, now we can move on with two new functions. The first function which I'm going to introduce it is called GTK GtkSignals. It is a function which returns a G Boolean, which means true or false, and takes 5 arguments. The first one is the detailed signals, the second one is the interface type or the instance type, the third one is the location where the signal ID is, which we are going to retrieve it. The same thing goes for detail, we are going to retrieve its information. And the last one is again a G Boolean, which means we can force the detail quark for creation. We have no details, so this is not important right now. Anyway, the main thing, the function itself says internal function to pass a signal name into its signal ID and detail quark. The main difference from this function and the GTK lookup is that this function returns an ID and takes the detail and the type, and I'm going to comment it right now. Okay, that was too much. And instead that I'm going to call GTK pairs name. The first two are the same like in the lookup, which means it is the details and the interface type or the instance type, and now we need the address of the signal ID, so the ID, and then now we need the detail. And the last one I'm going to set it to false because we are not working with details, we have no details. And now let me gquark detail, declare it. For those of you which you don't know about gquarks or you don't know what gquarks are, I'm strongly suggest to stop watching this video and go and search in my playlist. There is a playlist called gquark, and there you get all information you need to know about gquarks. Now at this point, these things right here, we don't need them anymore. At this point, because we are passing the ID and the detail, basically we have that connection right here. And at this point, let me compile it and run it for a second. Button, okay. Now let me compile it and run it again. I still have, let me see, click GTK ID, detail and false. What exactly? Let me press F2 to see where the argument 4 expanded gquark. Yes, of course, my bad, sorry guys. You need a variable, not a pointer variable. So detail. Right now it's okay. Now let's see. You click the button, as you can see, it works fine. Okay, if now we comment this part right here. It's not working because I need to silence the compiler, whatever. Okay, now the next function which I want to introduce you, it is called, let me go back, GTK handle find right here. It is a function basically which takes 2, 4, 6, 7. As you can see, it takes 7 different arguments. The first one is the instance, the second one is the mask, the next one is the signal ID, detail, closure, func and data. Now if you remember, basically this function takes the same arguments like, for example, disconnect by func, where it takes an instance, a func, the data, or let's say disconnect, like here it says it takes the ID and the instance and so on. There are so many ways which you can basically work with these arguments. They are different from different purpose and so on. And now the disconnect message matched as well. You see the disconnect matched says the same story, are those same. So it should not be something new for you. Now let me go back to that function find. In other words, before you try to disconnect something, try to see if you indeed have something to disconnect. So this is what we are going to do now. We are going to find it before we try to destroy it. For this, I'm going to save it, to store it in a variable. So I'm going to say GULong, I think it should be, yeah, GULong. GULong. Well, I'm going to say find ID. And here, what we are going to pass, the button. And now the second one will be the GTK match it by ID, because we are going to pass the ID right now. And then of course the last one are all those things which you don't need, so we have no detail to pass here. I'm not going to pass the detail. You will see why. Null for the callback, null from the function, and null for the data. And now, because we do have an ID which corresponds to this ID, because we found it, we can call now the GTK handler disconnect, and button, and of course the find ID. Now if everything works fine, because we have this ID, now as you can see, data gets free and the bot is dead. Now I'm going to make some changes, and the next thing which I'm going to show you, it will be the detail, which, like I said, it is not working because we have no detail, but I just want to be sure that you understand how these things are working. So here will be 0, not 0, and here will be the detail. Now at this point, if I'm trying to pass the detail, it's not working. I'm going to stop this function right now because we don't need it. Okay. As you can see, you click at the button, works fine. And that happens because the detail is 0. Now let me do the next step for you, which will be at this point find by closure. And now here basically we need to change this one to closure, because I change it. Now here will be again 0, closure, GULong, let me see, find button GTK ID. Like I said, here was the ID, null, null, and null. And now we can change the find detail with the find closure. We have a problem. Let's see. GTK match closure undeclared. So what I did? Okay, we have an L here which should not be there. Okay, let me compile it and run it again. Unused variable find detail. Yes, because we are not use it. I'm going to show you something a little bit later. Okay, now let me compile it and run it. And as you can see, it says the data gets free and the button is not working, or at least because it was disconnected. Now the next thing which we are going to do, it will be match by func, and here of course we are going to say null, and here we are going to say func this time, because we have the closure and we have the func, isn't it? The func is right here, you remember from the last video. If not, something you forgot. And now let us disconnect the handler from the func, which means now it should be func. And compile it and run it. and as you can see, data gets free and the button is not working anymore, and that's happened because we are disconnecting it. Now the next thing which we need, which is the last one, it will be find by data. So match by data and data null. Now because we have the data, we find it, we are going to disconnect it. What did I forget now? Yes, data, it should be capital Z. Now let's see. Now as you can see, the function is closed. Now let me show you something. I'm going to stop a little bit this one. Let me comment out everything so that you can check them all better. This one goes here. I need to align them a little bit. Okay, 0, next one right here, and now everything looks clear. Now let me print them for you. G print, the first one will be the button ID, which is percent LU, button ID. You will see in a second what's the story with that button ID. Next one, it is the detail. Next one is the closure. Next one is the func. Next one is the data. And now the ID, we don't need it at this point. So now they are quite aligned. Now we need the button ID for a second. That's very important. That's a big difference, so that you understand. So GU long, button ID, G signal connect, let's say swap, button, click it, G callback, let's say click it callback, and the button, of course. Now let us create fast this function right here, static void click it callback GTK button, and now we are going to check it. G return if fail, GTK is button, our button, this will not work, and here I'm going to say G print clicked whatever call back. Now basically what do we have here? We are storing the clicked signal, or better say we are storing the return type of the return of the signal connect swap based on the clicked signal, which we are monitoring as well on the button, and if that's happened, this callback should be called. At this point, let's see, I'm going to compile it and run it. Okay, now I have a problem, find ID, because I forgot the find ID. No problem, I'm going to do it right here, find ID. Now let me compile it and run it again. You will see different IDs. Now watch, the button ID has 53. You see, the find ID is also 53, which means they are matching, but the other one, they are different, which means the find detail is 42 and the find closure is 54, and so on, and those three are different. Now let me compile it and run it again. You will see they are changing at some point. You see, now we have 42 here, so basically all the time it could get different. You see, now they are 56, which means all the time they are getting like here says return a valid non-zero signal handle ID for a successful match. So in other words, you saw that if you want to disconnect an ID, you can do it based on its ID, which you get it from its detail, from its closure, from its func data, based on its data. It's no matter which one you decide to do it, it will just disconnect it. Now if you take, for example, the button ID right now, let me see. So disconnect the button ID. I want to show you something. You see, you are disconnecting only the ID which belongs to the clicked signal which you are monitoring right here. You see, this one. But the other callback works fine, which means it says the message you clicked the button works fine. You see? Now if you want to stop it, that one as well, you need to decide what exactly you want to pass. Me, I'm going to take the closure, so which means find closure ID. I'm going to pass it, and now I'm going to compile it and run it. At this point you will see that the button doesn't work and the data gets free, it's called, and this happens because we were disconnecting the connection between the closer and the signal, and the function free data it is called. So in other words, it's not that complicated. You just need to play a little bit with these informations, and once that you are going to code more and more, you will notice that it is not so complicated, and they are basically helpful. And you know now that every function which you are working with, if you have detail, closure, func or data inside it, you don't really need a special ID. Just with the help of data you can call the GTK handle find on that data, and then you get that ID, and with the help of that ID you can disconnect the thing which you basically connect them before, like for example here with the GTK closure by ID. That being said, thank you guys for watching. If you like it, please subscribe, share with your friends and neighbors, and until next time, see you guys.